Greetings, students. This is Mike Lilly. This is Business Law 301. On your little website, I believe this is going to be called Lecture 3. And if there are two Lecture 3s, this is the one where you get to see my gorgeous face rather than just hear the sound. And as far as I know, the microphone here should be picking me up a little better. We hope. Today, we're going to be lecturing in your text on chapter, I get the right number. Chapter 6, right here where it says tort law. Okay. Again, I don't have an overhead projector or project things other than having to hold them up in front of the TV camera. I mean the computer camera, but we'll go from there. This chapter marks the beginning of 2 or 3 chapters which we need to get covered prior to the first test in this class, which will be coming up hopefully week after next, depending again on class progress. Okay, so let's again talk if we can and see if we can get a few things straightened out. First thing we have to talk about is what do we mean by the word T-O-R-T, tort. No, it is not some fancy French word for a pastry or a German word for a pastry. That's T-O-R-T-E, which is a cake with 5 or more layers. There's also the word tart, T-A-R-T, which either means sharp, but also means a fruit pie. None of these fit the definition we're looking at, the word tort. And the word tort is so named, and let me see if I can move this. So it gives me a little better angle. Okay, that's better. I'm sorry, I'm experimenting on this camera view, and when you pull this class up, you'll understand why you don't want to see it looking up at me. Tort comes from the French word meaning twisted, and therefore it has come to be defined in English common law and here in American common law as any kind of civil lawsuit aimed at dealing with a situation of improper conduct by one person or another. There are lots of definitions of the word tort. Let me look here in your text. I'll give you the text definition before I give you Lily's definition. Okay. All right. A tort is defined in your text on page 129, says it's a wrong or injury to another other than a breach of contract. It's there at the top of page 129. I prefer a little different definition of the word tort. And that is that tort, a tort, is any social or civil wrong the violation of which the law awards compensatory damage. Let's talk about that again. A social or civil wrong for which the law allows compensatory damages. Essentially, therefore, we're talking about any form of conduct, whether it be from person or company or whatever, which harms another person in some way, or at least there's a claim it harms a person in some way, which, if you bring litigation in the court system, you can possibly be compensated or reimbursed, if you will, for any harm that has happened or occurred to you. We define torts into two very broad categories: intentional torts and unintentional, or as your text wants to talk about, negligence law, although unintentional torts cover certainly a great deal more than just simply negligence law. But first, we're going to lecture on and discuss in this class what's in this chapter, again, on intentional torts. By its definition, therefore, we're talking about some sort of conduct that the offending party meant to do. It's not something that's accidental. It's not something that you didn't think about doing. It's not something you did, when you were sleepwalking or intoxicated. No, we're talking about an action of some type, caused harm to someone else that you meant to do. So intentional, therefore, is that aspect we call willful. Okay, willful. So let's look, if we can, at the rather broad category of intentional torts as are defined in your text. And I'm going to turn this camera a little bit so you can see me better as I look in the book. Okay. And not that I'm problematic. Okay. Intentional torts cover a very broad category of things. But I might, starting again, basically, on page 131. But I need to get myself clear and make at least another one comment or two. I said torts are divided into two categories: intentional or unintentional. Your text divides torts into intentional, negligent, or strict liability, and both of those, strict liability and negligence, are acts that are not necessarily intentionally done. And again, we'll take a look at those in the next chapter. We'll talk about those issues. But today, again, we want to talk about intentional torts. And again, here on page 130 in your book, certainly is a discussion of the purpose of tort law and the three different types, broad categories of torts. But let's talk about intentional torts somewhat, because that's where much of our problem lays. First and foremost, some types of intentional torts are called torts against persons because for want of a better concept, these are civil actions which are derived from criminal actions that exist. For instance, the first type of tort case discussed in your text on 131 is the so-called assault and battery, which is directly lifted from criminal assault and battery statutes. Now, we here in West Virginia, on the criminal side of the equation, have three different types of assault and battery. One is simple assault, and the second is called unlawful wounding, and the third is called malicious assault. All of these have to do, again, with various forms of the basic concept. Tort law, however, just simply talks about assault and or battery. So let me define tort-wise what we mean by bad assault. An assault simply means someone putting another person in unnecessary fear of immediate bodily harm. That's your Lilly definition. Okay? Unnecessarily placing another person in fear of immediate bodily harm. It does not involve any kind of physical contact with another person. So in essence, what we're talking about here is when you scare someone so much that they think something's going to happen. And the real test as to whether an assault has occurred or not depends on the victim of the assault. Are they really in fear of harm of some type? Or, as some people are, and quite bluntly it happens, afraid of almost any and everything. Such that we may not believe or think that their actions should be, something which you be afraid of. For example, how many of y'all here in the classroom are afraid of ghosts? Come on, raise your hand. Anyone in here even believe ghosts exist? One person. Have you ever been threatened by nocturnal or eternal spirit? Anyone in your family coming back to get after you for something you did to them while they were still alive in this world? Now, we all see horror movies every day of the week, right? Including, I guess, the most recent about Old Lady Winchester's house out there in California. She continued to build rooms on and attached to the time of her death. Been lots of stories about that house, so there's nothing new. Except the new movie, I guess, pretends that there is some kind of evil being or spirit in every room in the house, and they're all after you. Just like I remember that, what I thought was really ridiculous movie called 13 Ghosts, in which somehow or another the deceased owner of our house has electronically captured 13 ghosts in the house to release them upon unsuspecting owners. Well, I don't believe in ghosts. But if someone did believe in ghosts, and you pulled an old-fashioned Halloween prank on them so much that you literally scared the you-know-what out of them, that could be grounds for an assault if, as a result of being that scared and that afraid that something's going to happen to them, that they suffered some physical response. It is not at all uncommon, right, for people to have heart attacks. They're scared too much. Other conditions can and do occur. People falling down, hurting themselves while trying to run away from, the harm or whatever. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be physical harm. It could be mental harm. We have lots of cases involving people or individuals who've been involved in basically who've suffered mental injuries or mental harm simply from being afraid something was going to happen. Okay. Now, let me see, who's the tallest person in this class? I think I know who the tallest person in this is. Stand up. Stand up. Yes, you, sir. I know you're taller than I am. All right. Now, I'm not going to show this on the camera, but I'm going to ask him to come up closer to me up front. Now, if I walked up to you like this, and you're looking at me, and I said, listen, I'm going to knock the snot out of you right now, what would you say?
I was just laughing.
Right. Do you think that's going to put you in fear of your life? Okay. You see, if it were somebody this tall, and I said that to them, they might think that was, immediate harm. All right, now close your eyes. Make sure you're not looking at anything. Now, students, assault or battery? You open it. Assault or battery? People who saw what I did. Assault or battery? You say.
I guess
It's not a battery, is it? Did I scare you? And by the way, what I did was I swung my fist in front of your face.
Oh.
You see? Once again, he didn't know that something was happening, right? So, given the fact that he didn't know something was happening, it can't be considered an assault because he wasn't afraid of it. Now, if he really thought I was going to sucker punch him, that might be a different matter, but, okay? And by the way, pardon me, I didn't mean to embarrass you here. I mean, let's face it. The same action causes different reactions in different people. So I want you all to understand, therefore, that an assault is in the mind, as we say, of the beholder, the person against whom the actions might have occurred. So, a civil action for assault, simple assault, all it requires is that something happened that scared you. And again, it could be the threat you were going to hit them. We always had a lot of lawsuits involving individuals who pointed guns at another person and said, I'm going to blow your brains out, knowing the gun was unloaded, or at least thinking it was unloaded. And of course, the person, when you put that weapon at them, they don't think it's unloaded. And by the way, of course, that's the greatest urban myth I know of, the myth of the unloaded gun. And I say that because too often we have people who are shot, killed, or seriously injured, right? As a result of someone pointing a, quote, unloaded gun, which isn't unloaded, has one or more bullets in the chamber. And that's just part of, I always say, part of really being stupid when you hand a real weapon and try to use it to scare someone. First rule of any kind of gun safety is always, right? Never believe a gun is unloaded unless you have personally checked it to see. Hey, you could have a revolver and it still has one shell in it. So even though you pull the trigger more than once, it doesn't matter. Anyway, assault is just that. Now the second half of the equation is a tort offense called battery. Lots of people equate assault and battery as if they were one and the same, but the reality is they're not one and the same. And assault is putting someone in fear of harm. Battery is some kind of physical contact with that person. Okay? And I might add, by the way, that tort case law seems to say that any kind of touching of an individual, if the other person considers it offensive, is sufficient for a battery. For instance, let's say you're in a white line waiting to buy the newest iPhone. And you know how those lines are in some stores. People seem to get there at 2 in the morning, camp out, or some other consumer item everybody wants to buy. And while you're standing in line, someone comes up and elbows you and shoves you out of the way so they can get in front of you. That's battery. I know in the past I've had students say, yeah, but Mr. Lilly, battery means, you got to really hit somebody pretty hard or do something really physical harm. And my answer is no. It's just some kind of unwanted physical contact, no matter how minor, that a person doesn't like. I've known some people, quite frankly, who are so afraid of catching a disease or some other kind of contact that merely touching them with your hand makes them think, oh, they're going to get some loathsome disease from your touching them. Obviously, there are lots of situations in which people do touch or put their hands on other people, not just in private places, but on an arm or maybe a hand on your shoulder or whatever, or a hug. These are things that some people simply don't want to like. And so that's a battery. So again, we're talking about assault and or battery. Okay? And a battery does not necessarily have to have an assault, as you saw from my demonstration. Likewise, an assault doesn't have to have any kind of physical contact that occurs after the assault takes place. Now, are there any kind of defenses in tort law to a claim of battery? Well, several, and again, they follow over in criminal law. One of the first, of course, is the issue of self-defense. Someone hits you, and in order to protect yourself, you're going to hit or strike them back. Okay? And the rule, I have to be admitted, always in those cases is he who hits first is the aggressor. He or she who hits back is not the aggressor. Okay? Now, again, your text has examples of what we're talking about. Given the fact that, basically speaking, self-defense theory, as again derived from criminal law, always is that you use only what is necessary force to repel something that has been happening to you or does happen. So self-defense, by the way, does not necessarily automatically include or mean that you pull out a gun or a knife and shoot someone or stab them. Okay? Self-defense essentially means that you have to be placed in a situation in which you have to use a graduated response of violence, or you have no other option other than to use deadly force in order to protect yourself. Now, there's a so-called third claim, and that is defense of property. which can be used here in certainly in West Virginia. And that is when, if ever, can you use deadly force to protect yourself from a burglar or intruder armed intruder who comes into your house. And West Virginia has always followed the rule that is permissible. Okay? Always followed it. I'm thinking it was first really given in court decisions way back in the early 1920s. Since then, of course, we've had passed the so-called castle defense. Many states have enacted. I don't know why they bothered to pass it in this state, because we already had such a strict rule. And it's always been statutory that you're allowed to keep guns in your home to protect yourself with in the event of intruders. That doesn't mean necessarily that killing someone who's in your home in many states is going to be justified. But I can tell you, at least in the state of West Virginia, if someone breaks into your home or stages in an armed invasion in your home and you shoot them, then you're justified to do so without criminal charges being filed. Yes, I know, every now and then we have people, burglars that is, who break in someone's house, get shot and injured, and then sue the homeowner for shooting. My answer to that is that, at least in this state, that's not a tort action which is going to be favorably looked at. Okay? All right, next. What about causing someone harm or hurting someone to protect the life of a third person? You're a grade school teacher. You got two kids in your classroom who get into a fight. I'm talking about, fist flying and all the rest. Now, so y'all know, I've had 4 children, so I can call young kids brats because I think I've earned the right to do so over all these years. So you have these two brats, varmints, whatever you want to call them. They're in a fist fight, right? And in order to stop it, you intervene and split them apart. And what usually you have to do, right, you have to grab one of them literally and physically pull them off the other and say, this is enough. Well, you'd be surprised how many parents want to sue teachers who break up a fight because little Miss Joni or little Johnny has been injured in some way or another. Most courts in most states allow a certain amount of reasonable force to be used in those type of situations. Likewise, if you're employed as a bouncer in a local bar, I'm not going to presume I have any such people employed in this room, although you'd be surprised how many times over all the years I've had students who moonlighted as bouncers after they got out of class. Sometimes things in local bars truly get out of hand. Hey, we're in Southern Appalachia, and we have a culture in all of our citizens that they like to go out oftentimes on the town at Friday or Saturday nights, get a few belts in them, and then start fighting. It's just our culture. It is not blaming anyone or not blaming anyone, but if you go to certain bars or beer joints, as I call them, guess what? You know you're going to get into a fight probably before the end of the night just because the clientele that are there. And don't anyone accuse me now. They're not trying to demean anyone. I'm just pointing out facts of life. Most establishments are safe to go to. Every now and then you might run into one you don't want to visit. The owner of the bar or the bouncer, or person hired as a bouncer, is certainly entitled to use reasonable force to get a threatening person out of the establishment. Maybe here's a better example. A major rock concert. And I can't remember who it was I recently saw who, as they were performing on stage, somebody from the audience jumped up on the stage and began wanting to dance with them or other things. And what's the first thing that happens? The security details up on that stage right after that person, right? And hauling them off the stage and usually casting them out the venue. That's reasonable force allowed, and therefore claim of a battery or something else of that nature is normally not going to be looked at or intercepted simply because of the fact that this is something that needed to be done for the protection of most everybody except that one person. And hey, the records are awful full of, big name performers being on the stage, right? And performing, and someone gets up on the stage and causes harm to them. Not everyone is an innocent dancer. So, sometimes reasonable force, that is some kind of physical contact, may be necessary in a situation, and that's a defense that can be brought up and can be used. Again, in the issue of assault and battery. What kind of damages can you get for assault and battery? Well, it depends on the case. We'll talk more about damages later, but suffice to say that juries can consider all sorts of things that you might have suffered harm with. I mean, it could be hospital bills, loss of work, psychiatric counseling visits, all sorts of things that can occur just from assault and battery, not much else. Okay, another common form of an intentional tort is known as false imprisonment. False imprisonment. And I know that's discussed here in this text, and I have to be honest, I have to look the page up. So here it's on page 140 in the book. False imprisonment. And I know I'm bouncing around, I'm not following everything as it's supposed to comes up in your book, but that's because I like to cover some things first and others later. False imprisonment. What we're basically talking about here is when someone's freedom of movement is somehow or another restrained or limited for an appreciable period of time by another person. It's a little different than your text, and it's for a reason. It's when one's freedom of movement is somehow or another restrained by another person for an appreciable period of time, and I forget to put in there, against your will. We've had false imprisonment cases which have arisen in an open public space. Not all false imprisonment cases involve someone like, say, Jamie Gunn in the Silence of the Lambs, or somewhere, where from that, what's that miserable show, Criminal Minds, where again you have serial murderers, right, who grab people, hold them up, put them up in holes in their basement or cells or whatever. No. False imprisonment could simply be to make someone get into the corner of a room and not allow them to leave that corner. we had more than one case involving anti-abortion protesters who, when a woman would attempt to enter an abortion clinic, these protesters would surround that person with picket signs and chants and not allow them to move forward or backward unless they got back in their car and left. Those cases involved false imprisonment. Why? Because that person's wanting to go someplace or freedom of movement was severely restricted. I've even been told, although I don't have a case in front of me, that there are examples in which, say there's two people outside, one of them says, I want to go so-and-so, and the other person says, no, you're not going there. If you try to go there, I'll have to assault you. That has been held to be false imprisonment. So in tort law, again, it is a very broad definition. A mention is made here in your text about the so-called pushy toy company and a situation in which mothers are lured into a so-called training session to demonstrate new products when in reality they're told they can leave whenever they want to, but when they try to leave are not allowed to. That actually is an actual case, and basically, again, the same concept. People aren't allowed to leave, are made to sit through things that changes. Now, I've already seen here in today's class people saying, but Mr. Lilly, I want to leave this lecture. I don't want to hear anymore. You're not allowed to let me leave. Well, I'll be honest. If you want to leave, bye. I'm not forcing you to listen to me, even though it may be torture. Okay. Actually, you're paying me to lecture to you, so odds change, right? You're paying me to take. You're paying to take this class, which means you're paying to hear my brilliant lectures. Although I confess how brilliant they are, depends on the ear of the beholder. Anyway, false imprisonment. Lots of cases. One of the big areas of false imprisonment, I know in our area, has always been the question of shoplifting. Now, in West Virginia, a manager of a store or a retail clerk or person employed for security purposes may detain peaceably, and I use that quote, peaceably, for up to 30 minutes a suspected shoplifter until law enforcement arrives in order to take charge of the situation and press formal charges. What makes one of us, a suspected shoplifter? Does that mean that you have to go past the checkout line without paying for something? Is that all? Now the answer is no. West Virginia statute, which by the way is mirrored by most other state shoplifting laws I've seen, because most of these were passed back in the early 30s, says that if you conceal merchandise in a store, then that is a presumption that you meant to steal it. Now, we, many years ago here at Bluefield State, and this actually, by the way, occurred before I was employed here, so it's really in the dark ages. We had a professor here on this campus, very absent-minded at times, but he was going through the checkout line and he had picked up a pack of chewing gum, which he put in his pocket. And honestly, I think, knowing who he was, just simply forgot it was there. He was immediately arrested and charged with all sorts of things. His basic claim was, well, I was going to pay for it, but the defense and the prosecution indicates it, but you put it in your pocket. And you took your hands out of your pocket and you left it in your pocket. And that's an indication that you're going to steal. So it meets the definition of the code. We used to have a lot of cases here in Mercer County, again, regarded suspected shoplifters who claimed they had been falsely accused of the theft and were being held by force in the store by store employees against their will. Which leads to the question again, as I've said, what is peaceably? I don't know. But one or more circuit judges have always told me that basically what it means is all you can really say to a suspected person of shoplifting is, will you accompany me back to my office so we can talk? You can't say, come to my office or else, I'm going to shoot you or something. Likewise, we've had cases, right, in which overzealous store employees chase people down and knock them on the ground and grab the merchandise back, chase them out in the parking lot or whatever. Yes, the word peaceably doesn't apply here. So anyway, we have indeed had these situations. I always remember a case involving the Kmart store here in Bluefield. Of course, we don't have Kmarts anymore. This is a long time ago. In which a sales clerk was handed a check to pay for merchandise. And the clerk immediately called the manager saying, this is Jane Doe. I know who she is because she has passed bad checks in this store before and she's trying to do it again. She was arrested and put in jail on the spot. But there was only one problem. It wasn't Jane Doe. This lady had dark black hair and was short and rather stocky in build. Real Jane Doe was tall, slender, and had blonde hair, light blonde hair. No real significance between the two. So there's a case again of false imprisonment. Why? Because this poor lady was actually held in jail until her husband could come get her bailed out. And she had done nothing wrong whatsoever. So these are areas, again, that can cause and do cause significant problems. All right. Now, another form of intentional tort mentioned here on 141 is so-called intentional infliction of emotional distress, the quote, tort of outrage. The leading case I remember on that, or one of the cases I always like to remember, aside from the one in your text, a mother is sitting on the front porch of her house awaiting her children to get home off the school bus. The school bus pulls out, lets the daughter and young son out, and they stop at the front of the house to open the mailbox, get the mail out. Around the corner comes a drunk driver who's racing at such a speed that he hits the young girl and knocks her 100 feet in the air. The mother, sitting on the front porch, maybe 25, 50 feet away, watches this happen and immediately has a complete mental meltdown on the spot. In the resulting lawsuit, she sues the driver not just for the death of her daughter, but for what happened to her as a result of seeing that. And the driver, of course, says, oh, well, you know, you can't hold me responsible for that because I didn't have any physical contact with you. I was 50 feet away from you, or whatever the distance was, and therefore you can't hold me responsible for that. The court, of course, looked at it and said, wrong. You have to expect that bystanders to a violent crime or a violent situation are going to be affected by it and do have the right to sue you. If I were in the audience in Las Vegas when that shooter let loose, I'll guarantee you that I think I would be justified in filing a civil action against his estate, because the guy's a multimillionaire, seeking damages for whatever emotional problems I had as a result of hiding down on the ground or whatever and praying that his bullets weren't going to kill me. So understand, therefore, that emotional distress, that's an example of emotional distress that could occur. So these are examples, again, of intentional torts, because these are things people mean to do and have to expect to suffer the consequences therefore. There's another one here. No, I want to get back to another area. Okay. Most likely, however, the type of intentional tort we've probably had the most litigation about is in the broad area known as defamation, discussed back on 132 in your text. And here on 133, there's a little chart that points out some aspects of defamation. Okay? By defamation, we mean any one of a number of types of civil actions against individuals for things they have caused. Initially, most civil actions for defamation would have been called libel or slander. As again mentioned here at the bottom of 132 and over here on 133. If it's printed, it's libel. If it's oral, it's slander. In other words, if I call you a bad name or accuse you of doing something that you didn't do falsely, and I'm doing that orally, that's slander. If it's in print, it's libel. Most cases we have today are libel because most of these situations involve usually something that happens in the newspaper or televised broadcasting. And a lot of people say, but that's slander, not libel. Well, one thing you have to really remember, you may not be aware of it, is that almost all broadcasts on the air have a transcript. Now, for instance, I pulled up a transcript of President Trump's State of the Union speech not long after he gave it, right? Word for word, including in parentheses all of those things about applause, which is what the speech lasted as long as it did, because everybody was, I guess, too many Republicans too busy jumping up and down and applauding at almost every other sentence. So most newscasts, interview shows, whatever, are generally pretty scripted. You might not think they are, but they are. Somebody sits down with Colbert or Jimmy Fallon or any other late night TV hosts, I guarantee you they've already been talked about what questions are going to be asked. So these are things that occur. Now, the definition of libel and slander basically is saying something untruthful about a person with the intent to harm either their reputation or the reputation of their family. In normally speaking, we therefore say that if you tell a falsehood about someone intentionally, it's called a lie. L-I-E, a lie, right? Part of the verb tense of the word verb lay. Lie is an intentional not telling the truth about the subject. And by the way, I'm told that all of us tell lies 14, 15, 20 times a day. Why? That's just human nature. It might be a little fib, it might be a big lie, it might not, whatever. Sociologists who've studied the art of lying, and that's not one of me, are going to say, hey, a lie, that happens. I tend to get away from it. But we have tons of examples of cases involving newspaper articles, particularly in tabloids, which have, well, to be honest, have to be untrue. Right? Let's see if I can think of one. Well, when you go through the checkout line at a grocery store, right, sitting there near the cash register is all of these tabloids. You ever notice some of those bizarre stories they have about, different movie stars, football players, or whatever? And I'm not just talking about the ones that say, Elvis is still alive, or JFK survived his assassination attempt, or the ever popular ones about aliens in the White House and, Area 51 or whatever. I'm reminded very much of an article which apparently appeared on the front page of one of the sister tabloids of the National Enquirer called the National Examiner, and showed a picture of an elderly woman dressed up with a kind of her head being covered. She was sitting in a rocking chair. And the article says 90-year-old woman gives birth to child. Oldest birth on record. And it named her. It said where she lived. There's only one problem with that article. One, poor lady whose picture was on the front page of that newspaper was over 90, suffering from severe Alzheimer's disease, and was in that rocking chair because basically that's where she was most of the time. And further, of course, she had not given birth to any children in about 50 or 60 years, right? So the story is totally made up. That's libel. There you are, totally made up story by a newspaper claiming it was fact. Just like another prominent story I see comes up about every 5 or 6 years about the Bat Boy. You ever read those Bat Boy articles? Young man raised in a cave by hordes of bats, which is why he looks like a little kid dressed up in a vampire costume from Halloween, which I think he really was. Yeah, this is Bat Boy, raised by the bats. Or Wolf Man. We used to have kids raised by wolves, like Mowgli in the original book, right? Mowgli's raised by wolves. Or Tarzan, right? Raised by gorillas in Africa. Yeah, these are frequent stories. I don't know. I'm always seeing these things, and I can't believe them. But most likely, what they're talking about is that so and so is having an affair with so and so, even though she's married to somebody else, right? Or so and so had this big fight, or whatever. It's always about some celebrities. Usually they're pregnant or suffering from some loathsome disease or whatever. They like to pick on Angelina Jolie a lot. I keep seeing articles that she's starving herself to death and all sorts of other things. But then when I see her in real life in pictures, I say, hey, wait a minute, there can't be any truth to this. Well, this is what we're talking about with libel or slander. Now, libel and slander laws were enacted here in the United States because of another problem that we used to have in our early history, the problem of dueling. I've still got 5 minutes left to talk. Dueling.
See, duel?
D-U-E-L, dueling. A duel is a fight to the death between two people on the grounds that one of them's sense of honor or reputation has been injured or that their family has been harmed. In the year 1815, the number one cause of death of adult men was not battle or war, it was dueling. And so here in the United States, we had a number of laws passed, libel and slander laws, to allow these types of situations to be settled in a court of law rather than out on the dueling field. Remember, the most famous duel in our country's history is between a sitting vice president of the United States, Aaron Burr, right, involved in a fatal duel with Alexander Hamilton over claims that Aaron Burr made about Alexander Hamilton's wife. It would be like Mike Pence today, I guess, being in a fight with, I don't know, Robert Reich, former Secretary of the Treasury, or I don't know, some other senator, name your senator, over comments they made in the Senate. Yeah, I mean, that's in essence what we're talking about. Of course, Hamilton is shot and dies. Y'all have been watching the play Hamilton, I guess, and all of that. So I'm not, I'm only commenting on that because I think historically it probably is the most famous duel we've had. Duels to the death, by the way, normally were not done with guns, but knives or swords were the most common weapons used. Certainly one of the more notorious duelers we ever had was a man named Jim Bowie, who was from Louisiana, New Orleans style. Apparently was involved in something like 50 or more fatal duels. In order to protect himself, he invented a rather large knife about this big called the Bowie knife. Still call that today. It's kind of like a half knife and half sword, a big fat blade. Yeah, he invented it so he could have an advantage in fatal duels that he got involved with in and around New Orleans. Yes, I know Jim Bowie's killed at the Battle of the Alamo. I won't get into that further. Anyway, libel and slander laws, therefore, have a purpose, and that's why we have them, and that's why they're in play at the current time. I'm going to finish up on defamation next class period. Yes, as far as I know, you'll be able to see me one way or the other, although I have to confess I got to do something about this camera angle next time. But I'm going to let us go. I'm going to close for now unless we have any questions in class. None? All right, I'll see you all next week.